So welcome. Just a brief introduction. I'm Hugh Derrick. I'm a partner at Eat Big Fish. We, for the last month or so, have been obsessing about a topic related to what we're going to talk about today. So we've been posting quite a lot and engaging in conversations around the whole notion of what we call socialized strategy. It's a fancy way of saying that the best strategy, in our opinion, is developed collaboratively. And we've been posting about that. And this panel discussion came out of that, where we just thought we would open up that topic to some more voices and some slightly different opinions around that. So today's topic is around how strategy survives the organization. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves in a minute. And I've given you a clue as to kind of what Eat Big Fish's perspective on this is, and we've been posting about that. So we'll interject where we think it's relevant, but hopefully you're just going to hear more from the panelists and from yourselves. Just in terms of how we want to run this, we're probably I'm going to try and host a conversation for about 40 to 45 minutes. And then we will open this up to questions. So please put your questions in the chat. There is a team behind the scenes here at Eat Big Fish. I can't multitask. Everybody here will tell you that, who are going to help sort of collate all the questions. And we'll try and make sure that we throw a number of those to our panelists towards the end of the session. Also, many of you put some questions in as part of your registration, and I'll try and feed some of those into the conversation as and when those occur. So thank you for doing that. I think the only other thing to say is we will send out a summary at the end of it, and we're very conscious from a lot of the comments that you've had, and it's our hope that you will walk away from this not just with an interesting conversation about the theory of how to drive strategy through an organization, but also some practical top tips, what you can do tomorrow. So I will ask the panelists about that at a certain point in the conversation, but if you don't feel like you've got enough of that or more than I can summarize comes up in conversation, we will send out a quick recap along with the recording in the next couple of days. So enough from me. I am just going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves by way of this question. So I'm going to go to Vicky first and just say, Vicky, why should anyone listen to you on this topic?
Well, Hugh, I've led strategy across a wide range of businesses, growing brands, turnaround, new business ventures, as well as situations where strategy was really the pathway to addressing issues in organizational culture. And because throughout that experience, I've owned the P&L, my approach is very practical. It's not just enough for it to sound smart. It really has to help people make better decisions and importantly, change behavior so that it creates measurable value. So that's the perspective I bring into the conversation.
Great. Yes, okay. And so, Joe, to you next. So just in terms of you, why should anyone listen to you on this topic?
Uh, uh, so I'm head of strategy and partner at an agency called Quality Meats. We're in the States. Our proposition as an agency, I guess, is that we develop stupidly brilliant big ideas. And even before that, I worked at Mother in London and I sold some pretty stupid strategic thinking. And I say that like, 'cause I think there's a power in being dumb and being stupid and being simple and grabbing people's attention. So I'd say my credibility comes from managing to convince very sensible people to do very silly things. You know, anyone in the UK will remember Dave's epic strut from Money Supermarket with the giant bottomed man strutting down the street that became a bizarre cultural moment, I think maybe 8 or 9 years ago. I was the strategist working on that. So, and here in the States, anyone from the US, we've done Super Bowl campaigns with pubic hair singing a ballad this year. So, like, I've convinced people to do some pretty not so sensible things. So that's what I guess my credibility comes from the stupidity that I've managed to convince people to engage with.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, you probably know we've been banging about anything that's interesting and avoiding dull. So I'm sure you're going to bring that to the conversation. Gabrielle, to you. So just, yeah, why should people listen to you? What's the unique perspective that you bring to the conversation?
I have watched 1,000 great strategies die. over the course of my career. I've spent 20 years on the agency side doing work that had huge business impact for my clients, like Audi, Intel, Xbox, and still teams left big opportunities on the table that we just couldn't get over the line. And then I spent 10 years inside of companies as a marketer, running brand marketing teams, product marketing teams, as a head of marketing, trying to figure out how to make big ideas land inside an organization and how to pull them through the business. And the answer is always the same. The people who have to change their behavior weren't in the room when the decisions got made. They got a deck and they looked at the deck and said, that's nice. And they kept doing what they were doing. No one changes their behavior because a slide deck told them to. And there's so much opportunity to do really great things inside of really interesting businesses if you can figure out a different way to get people motivated. Slide deck is not a motivator.
Okay. Thank you. So just to make it very visible to everyone, you have somebody with a lot of experience inside large corporate entities. I think, Vicky, it's safe to say that you've worked in some large, big global entities, matrix structures. Some of you will operate in those environments. So Vicky brings a lot of experience and perspective from that. Joe, a strategist in an organization, clearly keen on developing powerful, interesting ideas and being aware of how do you get those out of his mad and crazy head actually out into the street and onto film and into activations. How do you make that journey work? What do you have to protect and nurture? And in Gabrielle, you've got somebody who's worked on both sides of the fence. I think, Gabrielle, it's fair to say your new business is entirely focused on this issue. So it's something that's clearly personal. So for the people on the call, please, just think about those slightly different perspectives. There may be a very specific question you want to tailor to each of these people. Please do so. So let's just start with a sort of fairly simple question. And I'm going to start, Joe, back with you. What's the biggest mistake that people make when trying to cascade a strategy or a piece of powerful thinking through an organization? What's the kind of obvious, you go, oh, not that again,
That's a great question. I'd say the big mistake that and maybe this is more so for creative strategies, but I'm sure it does carry over. I think the big mistake that I see people making is I think they assume that you almost need to warm up people and like go through like stepping stones. I think it's this kind of bite-sized chunking of things, I think is the big mistake. It's like, okay, if the client or whoever it is if they're starting here, we need to slowly warm them up to get to here where we need them to be in order to do this. And I've just found it's a far better strategy for selling strategy to go in bold. I think that's the biggest mistake. I think people think that they need to meet people where they're at and then slowly inch them forward, where I think I've had much more success in the aggregate. There's been some spectacular failures doing this for sure, but I think better to get those out of the way early, is get a fast no, is what I like to say. But I think starting bold, I think, is always the better route. So yeah, the big mistake is thinking that you can like slowly warm up boil the frogs, I don't think that works.
Yeah. Vicky, do you respond to that? Because you sold some wonderful ideas at Crayola.
Well, I actually think one of the biggest mistakes is really around culture. Because I think at the end of the day, no matter how brilliant the strategy is, culture will trump strategy. And I think when you underestimate the impact of that, so existing orthodoxies, reward systems, level of understanding and engagement, I think as you think about what the strategy is, why that is the right strategy, how to cascade it, how to do all those things, really understanding the dynamics of your organization and pressuring on what has to be true for that strategy to be successful. I think underestimating the impact of that, I think can lead. I've seen unfortunately to pretty clear failures because to what we were talking before, brilliant strategy never quite got off the ground. So don't underestimate the impact of culture.
So can you give me a tangible example in your experience, in your past?
I think when there's existing orthodoxies around, well, that's how we do things, or we've tried that, that didn't work, or some other things, or your reward systems are not online, though that's nice that marketing or business is trying to do that. That's not actually what I'm measured on. And so being able to really kind of figure out how to get people in the broad organization to move in the same direction, right? Or you assume that just because you've communicated and there is alignment, that that alignment means agreement.
Yeah.
And that people are actually going to change their behavior to do that. So what it takes to sort of nurture the cultural aspect and the change management, I guess, is the way to capture it, to be able to do that. I think when you underestimate it, I think that's when the rollout gets significantly hampered, and it doesn't matter how brilliant your strategy is, it just doesn't get traction.
So kind of know the beast that you're dealing with, and people very often underestimate that.
And be really practical, like, right,
Yeah.
how does our organization function? What are the skeptics are going to say? How do we address it to make that part of the cultural aspects and mentalities make part of your rollout plan?
Okay. Gabrielle, to you, mistakes.
Mistakes. I think that and this is sort of my theme for the day. Like we as strategists are trained to sell a very particular thing. Like the things that we're already starting to talk about today, like Joe's saying, go in bold, get a fast no. Victoria's saying, think about what has to be true of the culture. Those are not things that we're trained to sell. Those aren't even necessarily the products. They're just like sort of actions that you take to sell a deck. We were trained to sell a deck, a framework, a smart slide. I spent countless hours like, are the words right? What's the right picture to go with these words that's going to have the right impact? Today, I think the mistake is thinking that that's the product. AI can make the deck. I think that AI can make the deck better than most of us. I'll say better than me. Probably it's probably faster, cheaper, and smarter than I am. But I think we have to think about what our expertise really is. Like, what are you doing when you're making that deck? What's happening in your head, and how do you bring that to life for people? I think the mistake is thinking that that thing that we sell is the deck. That's not what we sell. I think that if you want a strategy to live inside an organization, you have to think about like, what's the moment that gets someone to change their mind? What's the moment that you can get a product person and a marketing person to make a different agreement? What's the moment that you can get them to be surprised by what might be possible inside their organization? And that's the mistake we make, is thinking that the deck is the product, the line is the product, when it's really 100 other things.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I
Gabrielle,
think,
if I can
yeah.
double click on that, is I think what the deck is really focuses on what you want to say. And I think to your point, sometimes it misses is what they need to hear to actually change their behavior.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think as strategists, we have to actually, especially because of AI, because the saying of things can be done really nicely by AI. I would argue that certainly it's not as good as the strategy work that I do, but I don't even want to get in that. I don't even want to have that argument. I think that in this world today, we have to, as strategists, disrupt ourselves. We have to think about where the value is now, and we have to move. And I think that's the biggest mistake that strategists are making right now when they're trying to make something happen inside an organization. It's like, I wrote the deck, I made the words.
Right.
Now we're going to do something, and that's
So,
not what makes people do something.
so one of the things I guess I'm picking out of all of what you're saying is at some level, any strategy implies change. And so what are the conditions for change? And to Joe's point, why hide it 20 slides in, when actually really the whole purpose of the conversation you have is you want to elicit change. You want to create a response and reaction. If you walk people up to the punchline, you've already kind of lost some of the impact. Equally, Vicky, I think to your point, you're saying if you don't understand the path dependence of the organization and the cultural realities of that, and you're trying to affect change with the strategy, don't be surprised when that comes back and bites you. And the deck is not it. So we as strategists, I think recognizing that we are trying to affect change moves the conversations. What do I need to have done in order to affect change? How do I affect change most successfully here? Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. So so sort of basic rules of engagement. Now, I just want to double click on what you each kind of what your sort of soapbox point is. So, Joe, we had a pre-chat before we got on today, and you talked about short attention spans. I won't ruin the things you said about CMOs. I'll let you say that. But tell me about short attention spans.
Yeah, I mean it's a bit of a meme, and you always say, "Oh, the average attention span has dropped now to blah 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 seconds." I'm not sure how
Very
scientific.
You didn't
small.
pay attention to the detail, did you?
Yeah, I didn't pay attention to the detail. I'm not sure how scientifically valid they are, but I think you see this on a great many different things. I think weirdly in marketing, I know not everyone who's joined the call is in marketing, but marketing has and advertising I include under that umbrella. It has this weird thing where it's like we act like we're immune to the changes we point out about consumers. You know what I mean? It's like consumer attention spans are shrinking. Consumers are losing their trust in old media, and now they're like creators and influencers. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, emotion is the thing that matters when you're talking to consumers. And it's like my conjecture is that actually amongst marketing clients, those things are more true than consumers. I think marketers' attention spans are shorter. I think they're more motivated than consumers are by emotion. And maybe that emotion is security and like not getting fired, but that's an emotional thing as far as I'm concerned, rather than a rational thing. It's very clever though, because it pretends to be rational. You know what I mean? Even though it's deeply emotional. And I think the most important one is that shrinking attention spans, though. Marketers have got more things to juggle and more information coming at them. And my big thing here is just like you need to get really, really good at hooking people's attention and then crisply articulating. And he says that as he kind of waffles around the point quite a bit, but grabbing people's attention and then kind of like crisply articulating that change making thing that you mentioned, Hugh, in a way that's compelling to them and emotive to them, and like
Yeah.
another great a great bit of position I'm very jealous of, a competitor of ours, Mischief, here in the States. But this great line, which is the riskiest thing you can do is be ignored. And the reason I love that as an agency positioning is I don't necessarily agree, but I think it's a fantastic bit of positioning, because what it does is it's the Trump playbook in a way, or the Brexit playbook. I don't want to make this a political discussion, but what they do very cleverly is they introduce this idea of like risk and danger, and then being the secure, risk averse, safe option. Do you get what I mean? And Misty's positioning of, the riskiest thing you can do is be ignored. What that does is it says, being creative is actually avoids risk. And what's so brilliant about that is it grabs your attention immediately. Because like, oh shit, I'm at risk. If you're a client, but
Fear is one of the most powerful motivators, right?
It's very immediate, but also it depositions the rest of the creative industry, because all these other creative agencies for the last 15 years, because they all want to appear to be more important than they are. They talk about how brave and courageous it is to be, you need to be creatively brave. And like every client sitting there like, I don't want to be fucking brave. Brave sounds like a risky thing to do. I don't want to be Frodo. And I don't want to be climbing up Mount Doom. I want to be back in the Shire, just chilling. Leave the brave riskiness to other people, thanks. And I think what Mischief have done there is very clever, and they've managed to kind of get this attention grabbing, emotive, visceral way of saying like, hey, you need to grab people's attention. And I think it's a kind of great meta point about what you need to do as a strategist.
Well, I think also, I mean, but I think just going back to your very first point, I think why do we think that the audience that we're selling strategies to is any different to normal people? And if normal people have short attention spans and like, their sources of authority and trust come from different places, then we should learn those lessons. We should absolutely learn those lessons, and crystallizing a strategy. I'm sure I'm going to come to Vicky next. I know, because I'm going to ask you about simplicity, but the idea of just can you crystallize your strategy into a very simple line that's almost unforgettable is a really good takeaway. And we know these things are true, but it's so often the case that the lead is buried somewhere on page 62 of some deck. So Vicky, tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about simplicity.
So, you had mentioned, Hugh, you were talking about earlier, and you kind of made a comment, on page 20 of the deck. And that's when my mental screeching noise kind of goes through. Stop right there. That's part of the problem. Because I think if you need a 20-page deck to outline your strategy, I think that that's part of the issue right there to begin with. One of the things that I believed in, and one of the things that I've always asked my team to do, is to do the planning on 2 to 3 pages. What I didn't want is a deck that outlined all the data, all the insights, because at the end of the day, short attention spans, you get to the end and you go, wait, so what does that all mean? And what I think that's so key in the simplicity is, yes, of course, go into the business, understand the dynamics, look at the data. But what I always wanted is a one page that brings it all together and says, what is happening, why, and what is it that we need to go about this in order to drive the kind of business impact that we want, and boil it down to very simple, the way that I would sit to you in, over a cup of coffee in 5 minutes, tell you, here's the business issue, here's why it matters, and here's what we need to go do. When you can get it down to that level of simplicity, boil it down. And again, think about talking to the janitor in the hallway. Think about the neighbor that knows nothing about your business. Can you explain it that simply where they would go, yeah, I get it, right? If it's in strategy speak, that means you need a slide. That means you need an executive who's bought in at a high level to be able to explain it. When you get it down to a regular consumer simple language where anyone across the company, including the lowest levels or the broadest levels of the company, can explain it simply, that's when adoption happens because they understand it, they can absorb it, they can relate to it, and they're able to see how the work that they do, regardless of function, regardless of level, right? And I'm not talking about just marketing strategy, I'm talking even business strategy, how that actually matters, why it matters, how they work connects to it, and how that helps drive the business. So that simplicity of thought, language, I think is incredibly critical. And if it sounds like a strategy, if you need a slide, if you need someone to explain it, that I don't think you got it right yet. And when you
So,
get it to that point where I can just tell you about it and you go, yeah, I get it. That's when you know you have something.
so I'm imagining people on the call are going, I kind of know this. So
Yeah.
tell me from your experience how you do that. So my provocation
Yeah.
would be this, and I've spent a lot of time around marketers, and this comes up. It's one of the things that we're guilty of is we talk our own jargon, we say it in our own way, we write decks in our own way, and then we forget that we're selling it to people who talk an entirely different language or are motivated by different things.
Yep.
So I love the notion we have to aim for simplicity. We don't want to bury the lead. We want to simplify this. Have you got an elevator pitch? But literally at the level of how do I make sure that what I've written is going to travel
Yep.
beyond the echo chamber of my own team? How do
Yep.
you do that?
Well, I have this philosophy in anything in life where I don't always have to like it or agree with it, but I do need to understand it. And I think that applies to strategy as well, right? People need to understand it. And I think to me is a very simple, concise, and clear situation assessment is one of the first things that I go in and do. Is what is the situation? What are we facing? What problem are we trying to solve? Right? And what is really true about our business and what do we need? So I need to me, situation assessment, again, not a deck, one page that brings it down. I need to be able to read it and go, oh, I get it. So therefore, based on this, here's what we should go do. And then the next page in your planning is literally a page on the plan, objective strategies and tactics based on what that situation, the picture that situation assessment has painted. So I think a very simple, practical thing is, can you boil down all this data, all these thinkings, all these possibilities to a single page narrative that very clearly articulates what the situation, the problem is, and what the problem you're trying to face. And if I, as a reader, not as a strategist, but as a reader, and anywhere read that page, would I know what are the key pressure points and what you actually need to go do. That to me is the acid test. If I write the page and I get it, then I know exactly the rest of it in terms of your plan, in terms of your metrics, in terms of your KPIs, all of that falls out of it.
Yeah. So let's go back to change because I personally I think we would really endorse that notion, which is if you want someone to change, you really have to start with why should I change?
Right.
Why
Right.
change at all? And it can be a function of the burning platform, the picture you paint, or it might be the opportunity that you paint to change. But without that motivation, instinctively one's reaction to something that's new is, what the hell's this? Why am I engaging with it? So I take that, make sure that you've made the case for change. And that can be a combination of opportunity and risk that you're painting before you then lay out a very simple strategy. Um, Gabrielle, I'm tempted to say that one of the things about AI is that maybe if we use it well, it can help us simplify our stories and our strategies, at least to get them to a draft. So tell me about your sort of particular perspective on, you know, getting to great strategy. And in doing so, can you let me know whether you think what role these new tools and this new world that we're operating, what's changed recently that might help us and maybe hinder us?
Uh, yes. So two questions. How does AI help? And what was the first part? Part
Well,
one?
it's basically I want to know in terms of how, because I've asked each of you about short attention spans, simplicity. What would be your particular sort of take on what makes successful strategy? But I'm curious as to whether, just linking to the simplicity thought, we have a chance with the new tools to kind of make that bridge a bit easier. But tell us first what your particular angle is on
Yes.
great strategy.
Right now, I am living in a world where I believe that it's the experience of developing the strategy that makes a strategy travel. It is it is setting up an experience where the team has a moment where they can see a possibility that they did not see before. And it is so hard to create that experience in a deck and in a presentation. I work in tech. Most of my clients for the past 2 decades have been tech clients. I don't even like automotive today is tech and entertainment is tech. And so all the stories are driven by, even the marketers in these organizations are engineers. And sometimes you're working with the CEOs who are also engineers. And I actually just like my experience is different from Joe's, where the marketers are not the more emotional people. They are engineers and they are about optimizing, and everything's about like, what's the optimization? What's the next optimization? And that requires that everyone sort of stays in their lane and sort of continually optimized. I think today, you can't that there's so much opportunity and innovation that if you're staying in your lane and optimizing, you're going to lose to someone who is innovating and who is doing something different. And I think the real opportunity is to get people to see what they can do when they are working together. And that's what leads to great strategy, and that's what leads to strategy that travels or survives the organization, whatever language you want to put on it. A few years ago with Eat Big Fish, I did a project for Omada Health, where I was the head of brand and product marketing at the time. And we brought a cross-functional team into the room. This was sort of like in the moment where people were starting to meet in person again after the pandemic. And there's so many people at that table who had literally never met each other before, because not only like had they not been in an office together, but they're all working in their silo. And so they just had never even in their silo had never crossed paths. And something happened in that room that was truly different. The experience of getting people to work together on these problems was really different. And the chief medical officer, who's a brilliant doctor who had spent years working in digital health, came to me and said, "You changed my perspective in that meeting about what's possible in digital health. There are things I understand now that are possible that I didn't think were possible before." That's how you build a strategy, is you get people to change their minds about what they believe is possible. you get people to stop defending their silo and start solving the same problem. Um, and that, you know, I totally agree with Victoria that why change question, like you have to be super clear about it and you have to be able to write it down, but it's hard to make it happen on a page. You have to make it happen in the world. Eh, You know, a strategy is not a thing you present. A strategy answers the question, how will we win? Right? That's the question you're trying to get the organization to answer. So it's a thing that people have to decide to do together. And I think that's what makes a good strategy. And I think when you know, at some point you have to write it down on a page. And absolutely AI is super useful for helping you clarify your thinking and for helping you make it shorter, helping, you know, you can ask it to do whatever you want. And then, you know, I use it as a brainstorming tool. And it's also really good for all the you can't walk into a room like that and just say like, hey, let's brainstorm. You know, you have to, right? Like every time I try to sell something like this, like, oh, well, our team doesn't like to do brainstorming. I'm like, no, that's not what this is. Like, it's a really carefully designed experience that intentionally brings ideas into the room that everyone can engage with because you can, you know, or I get like this team's not very strategic, they're more functional, they don't have the expertise. You don't need any expertise. Like you come with your knowledge and we are going to design something that you can engage with. And we just did this for a client and there's a ton of work like
Okay.
analysis, interviews, market research, competitive research. AI is amazing at helping pull all that stuff together. I can work 2 or 3 or 10, I don't even know, much faster, 10 times faster than I did before. But it still requires that like lens of having people engage with the work and then building something with it.
And I think,
So,
Gabrielle, if I could build on that,
yeah.
is I think the beauty of what you're saying, right, is you do get, which I also learned having worked with Big Fish many moons ago, is that you bring very different perspectives into the room. So you don't have the same people that are sort of drinking the same Kool-Aid, right? You bring them that naive, intelligent, naive perspective from other parts of the organization that allows you not only to bring that in, but also pressure test your
Yes.
thinking. And not to mention that you have built-in advocates, right? If they're bought in and whatever you came out with, you have built-in advocates in other parts of the organization where it's no longer seen that, oh, that's just something the marketing team had done. That's their pet project. So it becomes something that really helps with the embedment
And
after
that's
the
something
work.
that
Yeah.
we do intentionally and that I've done in the past and that we do now is we help companies build ambassador teams. Like it's not just the leadership team. This has to stretch beyond the people that were in the room. How do you like train you know, you find those ambassadors, you train them, you give them the tools that they need to go tell the story over and over and over again. You support them, you know, you create some camaraderie among them so that they are in this together and not alone trying to make the strategy work and they're part of the organization.
Okay. I would love to go down a rabbit hole, which we encounter all the time, which is we sort of understand the logic of, the position that we would support, Gabrielle, and you support, which is that building strategies collaboratively is fantastically effective. But of course, in an attention-starved world and the realities of travel budgets and Zoom meetings, getting people together is an enormous expense in time. So I will park that because we could spend enough time talking about that because I really want to make sure that that you all have a chance just to give everyone kind of your top tips for what you could go back and do differently to help drive strategy through each organization. So Joe, you've been very patient. I know there are a number of really interesting questions in the chat, and I'm mildly distracted by those as well, but we'll come back to some of those, I promise. But Joe, can I ask you just, okay, tomorrow morning, the people either working with agencies or working to drive strategy through organizations, if you said, I have one, two, three bits of practical advice for things that you could do differently or really focus on, what would they be for you?
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe a little bit flippant, but I do think just like start doing TikTok or producing content for LinkedIn or like put yourself into and I kind of like set this up a little bit with saying like, oh, the changes that have happened for consumers, you'd be insane to not think they're going to happen in B2B. We're a B2B company. I think we're probably all B2B companies essentially here. We're not providing strategy for consumers looking for what breakfast cereal to eat. You know what I mean? No one's paying our fees for that, but clients of all shapes and sizes. We're a B2B company essentially. And like, I think the world of B2B is just like increasingly going to be swallowed up by that social creator influencer mindset. And like, once you start doing that, if it's video content or static content, it doesn't really matter. But once you start doing that, it teaches you so much in such an iterative way about how to structure your arguments and information and what works, and that balance between the fidelity of your thinking and the fidelity of the brain hole it's got to fit through. Do you get what I mean? Like ultimately, it's like, yes, I love a metaphor or an analogy, and the one I use for this is like moet, moet, moet. So like, it's actually I don't know. I'm not a wine guy, but like, apparently moet and Chandon is the correct way to pronounce it.
You're right.
But most people think that if you said Moet, most people are like, oh, check out this uneducated oik. Where have they dragged him in from? He doesn't know it's Moet. And like, I think that's kind of what I mean. It's like there's what you know to be the kind of high fidelity version of what you're thinking is. But that's just, you have to be able to make it lo-fi. It's like, I always say it's like Lego. It's like, some clients are Lego Technic. You can get the battery packs out and like have the whirly things and everything going. It's a Porsche 911 that's accurate. Others are Duplo, and you need to give those clients Duplo. And it doesn't make you smart if you go into like this Duplo requiring person and being like, hey, check out the Porsche 911. It's got moving wheels and an engine inside it. And they're just like eating the bits of it. You have to kind of right size the sad onions on the side of the packet, like 0 to 3 years kind of thing. And like that, I think when you put yourself in the world of, creating content and things like that, it will just teach you a lot about like, the truth is you're always meeting people in the middle, and like sometimes that means like lowering the fidelity of what you're suggesting. Other times it means making it more engaging aesthetically or whatever. So like that's my one tip. It's just like start creating things and put it out there, and you'll get much faster, more iterative feedback. You might be posting something every day or every other day, and that it just helps you learn quicker.
Brilliant.
I think, Joe, I want to say, I make content all the time and I learn a ton from it, but you do it brilliantly. You create amazing content. And I think for all of us who are strategists, thinking about how do we put something out there and thinking about how we tell a story and what gets engagement, like having that experience is huge. I find that like I spend all this time making this like carefully crafted argument, but the things that get the most traction are, just me like, here's what I think and this is what I feel and here's why. It gets much more engagement than when I researched a thing and I have 3 stats and it's proven, it's totally proven, and here's the impact it's going to have on your business. I did that last week. I had like 50 views. I've got 6,000 followers. I got nothing, but like you being intentional is so powerful, and it's a great learning tool for us as strategists to understand what people pay attention to.
Totally.
So Gabrielle, just so again, your top tips, just it's tomorrow, from whatever experience and perspective you want to bring to it, just what would you ask people to think about doing differently?
I mean, I have a couple of things. I think, what Joe is talking about is you have to make people feel something. Look, this is what we tell our clients all the time. You have to make your consumer feel something, right? Like no one makes a logical decision. They make emotional decisions. When I worked in automotive, there was some like mythical paper that I was never able to find, something that McKinsey did probably in the 80s that was like, people who most engage with automotive ads are the people who just bought a car because they need a cocktail party fact to justify whatever they just spent on their car. I don't know if it's true, but it's really good meeting theater. But I think that's, and that is actually like, look at the neuroscience or the research or the behavioral economics, whatever. That is how we make decisions. We make an emotional decision and
And
then
we
we
post
back it up
rational.
with a rational fact. So you have to, like, Joe is right. You have to make people feel something. And I think that means you have to get off the slide, like, and that can look like a lot of different things. Sometimes you bring a customer into the room and have a conversation with them. Sometimes like, I got the team at Omada to actually start bringing customers to team meetings. We would have a customer come in and tell their story. Uh, Not enough companies actually talk to their customers.
Yeah.
I have a client who we just brought a whole bunch of quotes into a room with an executive team, and they were like, "We need to share these quotes with the company." I was like, "Yes, you do. Yes, you do." So bring your customer into the room in some way, make your clients feel emotion, and I think the third thing is, like, for me, give up ownership of writing the strategy. That has been for me a big shift, because as the strategist, like, that's how you get promoted. That's how you, like, move forward in your careers. I wrote the strategy and it was brilliant and everyone loved it. Like, give it up. Do it in a way that lets other people take the building blocks that you bring into the room and put something else together with it that they own. I think when they own it, it moves further, faster.
Great. Vicky.
I think the first point is just, again, just to triple click on it, is clarity, for all the reasons that we have talked about. And I think the interesting analogy for as an approach here is one of storytelling, right? When you actually, and there was a comment in the chat that, that asked about decks. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do a deck. What I'm saying is deck is not a path to getting to a good strategy. Once you have clear good strategy, yes, you might need to deck to be able to explain it, but it's not a way to get to the thinking and the way to potentially. So I think that's one thing. And again, storytelling is an interesting kind of a notion for me, right? There's kind of like the story arc, which is the strategy, but there is the context and the setup, which is the clarity of the thinking and the why. And then there's sort of like the resolution in the end, which is really the embedment process. So, and I think we know that there's all kinds of statistics. The human brain, right, processes information and retains information something like 20 times. I may have made up that fact, but the point is right. It's about like 20 times when the information is delivered in the storytelling format versus, facts and data and things like that. So I think having that clarity is the first one. The second one is around really pressure testing the strategy. If we were to adopt it, what has to be true for that strategy to really be impactful and genuine? And Gabrielle, I know you had shared before offline an example of, hey, when we got that strategy right, it affected product, it affected packaging, it affected all these other things. It wasn't just in the vacuum, is that if we're really going to live this, here's all the things that need to be true. We need to exit some certain things. We need to get into other things. We need a new set of capabilities that we don't actually have. And what purposeful decisions that we need to make to actually get there. So this idea of really being clear on what has to be true deliver on that strategy, because I unfortunately have experienced a situation where it was a great strategy, but then the business sort of went on as it had previously and the building blocks didn't happen. So the strategy just changed a couple of years from now because it needed to, because it never really got embedded. So I think that idea of pressure testing and the credibility. So if the first one was around clarity, the second was on the credibility that comes from your actions being consistent with the strategy that you're trying to pursue. And the third point I would make is one of repetition and the fact that reach and frequency still matter. We're all human beings within the organizations, right? So continuing to connect the dots at an organizational level, as well as for people, how their individual work connects to it. I have had situations where I was genuinely shocked, where a strategy was clear, well communicated, and people would still say, I don't understand how my work is connecting to that. And that sometimes would bug, how is that not be clear? But my point is don't take it for granted. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but be purposeful in asking the question and make sure that they understand how their individual work, how their metrics actually connect or help move the organization towards that desired strategy. And that consistent behavior and that messaging that creates the the repetition, the kind of like the credibility and the organizational belief, because it becomes a flywheel, right? That ultimately helps fuel the both the implementation, but also the results.
Okay. Can I ask you just very briefly because I always feel like when you in your work at Crayola, there was a great opportunity to make things to be emotional. Do you have a story about that kind, or did that not happen? Is that not how you sold in strategy at Crayola? Was this because a lot of the ideas you've had about emotion, play,
Yeah.
tangible things, and for Crayola, given the subject matter, was that part of your success there?
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of touch points that are probably relevant example. The very first one is the work I led to help define what the Crayola mission actually is. Crayola was a very interesting position. Everybody knew about it, but at the same time, people were having a hard time defining it, and there was just, a arts and crafts brand for very young kids. So defining what that bigger mission is, and not just what the company or the brand does, but why it exists was the first pivotal point. And a lot of things we talked about today is the really the cross-functional alignment, the kind of work, the thinking, what has to be true for that to hold and what changes need to have. And even the conversation of, when we got to the end and we had this really compelling mission, which by the way still stands today over 15 years later, was defined. There was a 30-page deck, but then there was also about a 90-second video that was
Okay.
really emotive. And we started trying to show the deck, and then we said, oh, forget it, that doesn't work. We just played the 90-second video, and everybody internally, retail customers, vendors, and partners would watch the 90 seconds and they go, I got that.
Yeah.
That's when we knew we had it right. And then
Okay.
fast forward many, many years, when you kind of think about, if it's a brand that is not about arts and crafts, but a brand that champions creativity, right, and nurtures creativity as a life skill in both kids for development and adults for wellness and, and mental recharge, that's a brand that could do a lot of things. It can get into
Yeah.
different lines of business. It could communicate very differently. It could pursue different partnerships. So it really created a much broader aperture for what the business looks like. So I think those are just a couple of examples on the upfront and then what it sort of enabled in the back end that really broadened what the brand is, how people connect to it, and the kind of business, that it can pursue.
Okay. Right. 10 minutes of questions, and brevity is your friend, panelists. Okay. Starting with Joe. Joe and the rest of the panel, what do you do when you sell in a great idea, but it starts to get watered down after time? Short, pithy answers, please. Selling an idea, it gets watered down.
Uh, I think sometimes you just have to accept that's what's going to happen. It's very, in fact, I'd go as far as to say that like my biggest bugbear with creatives is they've got this kind of like immaculate conception mindset where it's just like, oh, the idea was born pure, and anything that changes it, that is a bad thing. So like I just think you kind of got to let go a little bit and like accept that it's going to change and like remove your own biases because maybe that change is improving it. Like who are you? Who is the person who had the idea to say that changing it makes it better or
Worse.
worse? Is
Yeah.
my opinion. So it's like I think
Okay.
you just have to accept it.
Vicky or Gabrielle, do you anything to add on
I,
that, or shall we move on?
yeah, I have a quick one. I think
Yeah.
when you're sitting inside an organization as a marketer, you can think about like, what is one thing that I can control, where I can express that idea in market in the way that I think it should be expressed. Do that thing and see what happens. Because then when you can point, if it works, you can point to that inside the organization and say, like, I did it like this, and here's what happened. I made it more provocative. It was less watered down. It had a bigger POV. Sometimes that helps you get the traction you need to keep the idea sharp.
Okay. Vicky,
Yeah,
anything from
and,
you?
and for me, it's just be really, really clear on what you're trying to do, right? Because I think the question is, if you're evolving the idea, are you evolving to make the idea better, or you're changing the fundamental premise of what the idea needs to do? And I think those two are very different.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I love this. Another question. Vicky, we'll stay with you. Uh, have we lost our mind with frameworks? Frameworks seem to have become corporate shortcut for strategy, but also seem to be a straitjacket. Yeah.
Yeah.
So framework.
Um,
We love a
I
framework.
think I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I think frameworks can give you a helpful starting point because sometimes organizations have a hard time of just getting to the point where and how do I get started, right? So I think they can be helpful way to get the conversation going. But I think if you use them rigidly without really understanding what makes sense for the business and what you need to accomplish, then they do become very constraining. And I think the outcome in the best case is not filling out the framework or using the framework. It's the using the tools you got to solve the problem you're trying to solve. And I think having the flexibility, so I do think it can be a straitjacket if you use it blindly for the sake of the framework, as opposed to focusing on what you need to accomplish for your business.
So frameworks that summarize generally quite good, but frameworks that are supposedly a kind of paint by numbers is probably not so good.
Right.
Okay. Joe, do you use frameworks?
Yeah, I mean, I use them all the time. I tell you, I want to be on mute because I've got an air conditioner. I don't want it to be
Okay.
like when other people are talking. I think I would have I'd probably give you. I think I would have given you a different answer when I worked in the UK to now working in the States. I think there's I think the US business culture and culture more generally like rules and structure, and they're much less flexible with things. So I think here you have to be very, very green-fingered when you're introducing frameworks, like extremely green-fingered, because people will take it and then just execute against it. They will follow that framework to the letter. It's a very executionally focused culture. So you just have to be extremely careful with them, with how you use and how you deploy frameworks here. So I prefer to build my own though. I think is always the trick. It's always like, okay, I've got this client, they want to do this thing. Here are the things that are important. So here's a framework that just captures those important things. Let's go and find your distinctive brand asset and your product tension and your whatever that might be. So I don't like trying to take something off the peg. I like to build it specific to the task that's at hand.
Okay. Gabrielle, anything on that?
Frameworks. I mean, I love a framework. It's hard not it's hard not to use them. I agree with Joe though. I have actually used them in the way that Joe talks about, where you want to make it a set of rules because the organization doesn't have the skill sets or the time. I think a lot of times it's the time. Like people are making so many things and making them so fast. And now it's not even people making them, it's AI making them. So you want a framework that has the rules, but that just like anything that has a useful sort of reason for being, there are things about it that are not good. And so I'm a strategist. I love a framework. It's hard to get away from them.
A couple more. One I think we've all encountered probably. How do you manage a senior founder or leader who might not understand the strategy really, but think they do, who have a brilliant idea that doesn't land with the strategic thinking you've created? In other words, you've done all the hard work, but they have a completely different idea. How do you manage that? Have you ever come across that? Any of you? Who wants to pick that one?
Yeah, I'd love to dovetail this into Nicholas's question as well, because I think I've got an answer that kind of touches
Okay.
on both of these things. I think the issue with, and I'd say this as someone who comes from marketing and advertising, fundamental to what we do is the truth that people will not do as they are told, right? People will not do what you tell them to do. People will only ever do things they want to do or are threatened with violence to do. They're your option. You're not allowed to threaten with violence, but like people will just do what they want to do. So the job for you as a strategist in a creative organization most of the time is work out the thing that is going to make people want to do the thing that we need them to do for our marketing and advertising to be successful, you know? And the issue with senior people is they live in a strange bubble where they can tell people what to do. They don't have the same level of familiarity with having to convince people and making people want to do things because they can say to junior people, fetch me a latte, don't make it too hot. And that person will do it. And that is not how the rest of reality works, unless you're either a senior business person, a monarch, or a dictator. They're the only people who can do that. You know what I mean? Like, or a celebrity. And like, I think as a result, you have to very tenderly and gently explain that we can't just make we don't, someone's livelihood is not at risk if they don't buy your new flavor of Pringles. You know what I mean? It's not like they're going to lose their health insurance if they don't do what you tell them. And I think that's the challenge. The more senior someone is, and a client or whoever it is, and it can be internal creatives too, the less familiar they are with this fundamental truism that forms the foundation of
Yeah.
creative marketing, which is like you can't just tell people to do something. You have to make them want to do it. And I think that's the thing. You just kind of constantly have to hammer that. It's like we kind of can't just make people want
Your idea.
shrimp Pringles thing, juice or whatever they've got in their brain.
Do Vicky or Gabrielle, do you want to pick up on the on the
I,
chairman's idea issue? Because I'm sure you've both come across it.
my practice for what I do now with that is you have to let them do it. And I think the idea, like if a CEO wants to do the thing and it's not aligned with the strategy, you're not going to stop them from doing the thing. Like, and you're only going to damage yourself by arguing it. But you can try to constrain it. Like, hey, let's test that. What's the MVP, like the minimum viable way we can test that and get some information? Let's test it alongside some other things. That's a great idea. What are other things we can test? And, sometimes it works. Yeah, and then who cares? Then maybe the strategy is wrong. Maybe you need to shift to accommodate it. Maybe, like Joe says, like the idea was born one way, but you have to stretch it to fit something else. Like you test it. Let them do it.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to, my big thing, like I said, is always, I may agree, I may not agree, but I need to understand why. What is it, the founder has a great idea. Is it because they think they just have a great creative idea where they actually think they're solving against the same strategy? Or do you have a fundamentally disconnect on the strategy? So for me, I usually go with just a bunch of questions and the idea of where's the point of disconnect, because there is one somewhere. And really understanding that. And once you know that, I think that you might play sort of your cards a little bit differently. But if it comes to a point where, at the end of the day, you have a point of input, what's a decision-making framework that you actually have in your role, right? If you are the input and they are the decision maker, then you know what, you could give your input, but at some point you got to get in the boat and say, okay, and and kind of go with what Gabrielle had mentioned. There are ways to sort of to test, to learn, and able to set up key check-in points and milestones so that you can learn and pivot if necessary.
And you're right, Victoria. I think that's such a like under appreciated point is you have to diagnose why. Like you have to diagnose why they have this idea that is not in line with the rest of the ideas. Like and that time that is well worth doing because it can help you figure out where you're not communicating right, where they have a different set of assumptions. It's an important part of that process.
Thank you. We are at time, everyone. So I just want to thank all my panelists. I won't attempt to summarize completely what they've talked about. I have a few favorite moments. I will find it hard not to think of CMOs as sort of distracted teenagers. I will remember simplicity. I will also absolutely recognize that we should. I think the notion of using the tools that are now available to us to sell and storytell, we should all be trying to use those tools and learn from that. There's no distinction from us and normal people, and CMOs and CEOs and CFOs are the same. So many really simple insights. We will summarize this. We will send out the recording. We will send out some of the tips and insights that came from it. And I apologize, we didn't get to all of the questions. We will attempt to answer some of them, and we will maybe ask our panelists if they're willing to, add to it. We'll put it out on LinkedIn, and if they can sort of answer some of the questions that we didn't answer or contribute, I'm sure they will. But thank you so much. Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you, Vicky. And thank you, Joe. We'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.